Now, that unfortunately is the level to which political dialogue has descended here in Oxford. Anyway, Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanwo TV. This is another Herpanwo TV roving review, like so many others I've done. It's slightly different in several ways. I'm going to see a film. I'm going to see a film which it's not election related. I might have to shout because it's noisy along here on Cowley Road, which is kind of the bohemian quarter of Oxford. It's not election related. In fact, now the general election's over, it's quite good. Now I can think about Christmas. I couldn't really think about it before then. The general election sort of got in the way of Christmas, what's normally like Christmas. So it was like, not for me, thanks mate. So it got in the way of Christmas. So now that's out of the way, I can think about Christmas and I can do Christmas things. I've already been to I went to see a brass band the other night. It was great, like playing Christmas carols and things. Really, really good. But anyway, I'm going to see this film. It's unusual because this film is at a cinema called the Ultimate Picture Palace here on Cowley Road. So it's kind of like I said, Oxford's bohemian quarter. And this is one of those kinds of cinemas, you know, independent cinemas that show basically art house flicks. So you go there if you want to see like the latest Italian movies and other foreign language films, and other kind of like not on general release, more intellectual kind of films, documentaries and stuff like that. And so it's a different cinema. I've not taken you to this cinema before. I think I've done a Herpanwo TV roving review at this particular cinema. I've been to other cinemas. So I've been to this cinema before a couple of times. They actually had Loose Change there, but I've not taken you guys to this cinema during a roving review on Herpanwo TV. It's also interesting. I'm going to see another old movie now. Do you remember I went to see Dr. Strangelove? It was a rescreening of an old movie. This is another one. It's a much older one though. I think this is probably the oldest film I've reviewed on Herpanwo TV during these roving reviews, and it's actually was first released in 1946, and it's called It's a Wonderful Life. Generally thought to be a Christmas movie, although, well, for reasons I'll explain, I think it's more than that. I think you can enjoy any time of the year. It's when it was first released, it was actually a box office flop. I mean, it got back like a fraction of what it cost to make. However, over the years, it built in popularity over the years. It was booked again and again for rescreenings. When TV came along, it was put on television a lot. Then the home entertainment media market began, VHS, DVD, iTunes, etc., and it became very popular on that. So it's over time it's grown and grown and grown into a classic, and it's regarded as a Christmas film, like I said, but it is an absolute classic. Now, it's very interesting in many, many ways, and obviously I'll tell you more about the film when I've seen it. Now, I say seen it, I've seen it loads of times, but one of the most interesting concepts in this film is that of parallel universes. Now, you know that I'm very interested in this particular subject, the idea of parallel universes, alternative realities, and things like that, wormholes, stargates, etc. And indeed, I've reviewed films like Never Let Me Go, and indeed, the idea of parallel universes is part of my own Roswell trilogy. If you've read those books, you'll know that. But this, I've never seen that concept in a film that's that old. I think this is the earliest cinematic representation of that concept of the parallel universe. I've not heard of an earlier one. If you have, please let me know. So I'm going to go and see this film now. As I said, if you watch me regularly, you'll probably have seen my DVDs on my shelf video, and you'll know I've got a DVD copy of this particular movie, and it's one of my favourites, and I've watched it loads and loads of times. So you'll say, well, Ben, why are you going to go to the cinema and see it now then? Why are you going to the cinema to see this film? You know, it's just one that you've seen anyway, you watch all the time, you've got it on home media. This ties in with what I have talked about before when it comes to the cinema. That the cinema survives in the modern world when many decades after many people predicted it would disappear. The cinema itself would no longer happen. That is like a large room where you screen movies and lots of people will pay to get in and see it. Because the invention of the television made people think, well, that's okay, they won't need cinemas anymore now because everyone's got a TV. Just put new movies on the TV. That's all you got to do. And a lot of cinema aficionados were very sad about that, and they said, you know, oh, but it's sad it's going to go. And the thing about it is, it endures. It endures because there's something special about it. There's something special about it. There's something special about the experience of seeing a movie in the flex. It is. It's the size of the room. You're in a big room. You've got a big screen. It's like an occasion. You're sharing that experience with all the other people in the room. And it's where, as this documentary, there's a documentary on the British film industry which brought up this subject. I watched once, and it said, and to think that you can actually take that and squeeze it into a small box in the corner of your room is ridiculous. And he says at the end, don't you want to dream anymore? Cinemas is where dreams are made, and don't you want to dream anymore? And the answer is people do want to dream, which is why there are still cinemas. And that's why I'm going there now to watch a film that I know that I've seen dozens of times, I'm very familiar with, and I have it on DVD. But I'm still going to go and watch it on this big screen because it is an occasion. It's also, I mean, it makes this video more interesting, doesn't it? I mean, I've done Herpanmo TV film reviews of it, like Drop Dead Fred, Never Let Me Go, I've talked about before. I've done Herpanmo TV reviews of films that I have on DVD, but they're just not as interesting as when I go out like this, are they? So I'm actually going to, I'm nearly there now, so I'm just going to go over here and go to the Ultimate Picture Palace. It actually used to be called the Penultimate Picture Palace, I remember. And it was a Bill Hiney cinema, I think, like Phoenix. My mum actually used to work at the Phoenix. It was owned by the same guy, Bill Hiney. I don't know if he actually, well, he's dead now, Bill Hiney. But I don't know if he actually owned this one. I think he did, actually. But it's like a small place. It used to be a bit grotty, and you used to have like fleas crawling up your legs in the middle of the performance. You used to get bites. But honestly, it's gone up market. The last time I went in there, like I said, was to watch Loose Change, and it was actually pretty good. It was actually quite modern and new. So here it is. This is the Ultimate Picture Palace. I'm going to go in there and watch the movie. So seems like quite a few people. You never know. Look, there it is. It's yeah, good old-fashioned art house flick place. Okay, I'm out. I've watched the movie. Now, in the course of this film, you might hear a bell ring at some point from some source or another, church bell, doorbell, something like that. And if you do, remember, every time you hear a bell ring, it means an angel gets its wings. Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know what you can really say about it. It's like, if you've seen the movie, maybe you'll understand. I think it is a film you have to see to understand, and I was so glad to watch it again on the big screen. I've never seen it on the big screen before, and of course, never thought I would. I didn't realise it was still being screened. But as I said earlier, even in this day of home entertainment media, they do sometimes show old films, and they're very, very nice because you get to see the old movie as people would have seen it years ago when it was first released. You get the opportunity. It's a film that changes people's lives, and it has become, over the years, very, very popular, very much loved a movie, and deservedly. I understand why that is. It's a film about, it's a kind of a comedy. There's some funny bits in it. It's what you call a feel-good movie. Do you know, you ever hear about feel-good films? Sometimes they're called blues busters. These are films with an optimistic theme, and happy kind of like atmosphere to them, happy themed, happy tone to them, which is specifically intended to raise the spirits. And this does that. This one really does that. In fact, it does more than that actually. In fact, it's probably the most extreme feel-good movie there is. But it plunges right into, I think, the depths of spirituality and humanity in a way that I don't think any others do. I don't think any others do that. This makes it unique. It's like a special kind of thing. You know what I mean? It's special sort of. This makes it different from other films, other feel-good movies. It's a story about a man called George Bailey, and he's a man who lives in a place called Bedford Falls, which is somewhere in the USA. I think it was in upstate New York area of the USA, and it follows his life from when he's a child to an adult, and what could be the end of his life, because it ends with him attempting suicide. Sounds grim, but it's not. It's not grim. And so during the course of his life, he does many good things. Like he actually runs a credit association. It's like a credit union kind of thing, called the Bailey Building and Loan. It's a family business. But he feels unsatisfied with his life. I mean, he marries a beautiful woman called Mary, who he's very much in love with. I'll go down the side street now. Whom he's very much in love with, and it's a very sweet courtship, actually, very romantic. It's one of the nicest kind of courtships, the way it's portrayed, in any film, I think. And but he feels unfulfilled with his life, because he has this friend called Sam Wainwright, who's become very rich and successful. He wants to be rich and successful. He's ambitious. And he wants to travel, he wants to see the world. He's got plans to go to university and get an education, get training. He wants to be an engineer, he wants to build bridges and airfields. And at one point he says to Mary when they're dating, he says to her, "Do you want the moon? I'll throw a lasso around it and I'll pull it down for you." And that becomes like a running joke in the film. And he says, "I want to shake the dust of this crummy town off my shoes, and I want to see," and he wants to travel the world and come back and be a great man. Every time he has an opportunity to do that, he's thwarted, and he ends up, through his own choice, he ends up supporting the Bailey Building and Loan. And there's this in Bedford Falls. There's this evil, kind of nasty little old man called Henry Potter, who's a greedy, avaricious kind of person. He's very much, I suppose, a cipher, I suppose. Interestingly, I should tell the story because he was some people were concerned that he was like a satirical character, kind of like a stereotype of an evil businessman and kind of Mr. Burns type person, and indeed Ayn Rand got involved in this. I should tell that story, but I won't tell it now. I'll do a studio scene now, actually, because it's an interesting story. I don't have all the details in my head, so I'll do a studio scene now and give you the details. Right, I'll give you a few more details now about exactly what I was talking about back then. This shocked me when I found out that It's a Wonderful Life was accused of spreading communist propaganda during the Red Scare. And what shocked me even more is that the person who is believed to have denounced this film is none other than Ayn Rand. There's a picture of her here testifying before the HUAC. And now during the 1940s and 50s, there was a hysterical fear that struck down the entire United States of America. This hysterical fear of communists. Communists! There's Reds under my bed, things like that. Now, the word communist had a very different colloquial use to that of today. It didn't necessarily mean an orthodox Marxist.
it could be applied to anybody who was simply not a table-thumping redneck. Now, with retrospect, it turns out there was some justification for that fear. Because the Venona project, I'll talk more about this in future videos, but the Venona project was a counterintelligence operations by the Signal Intelligence Service, which later became, infamously, the NSA, National Security Agency of Edward Snowden fame. And the Venona project exposed the Cambridge spies, Blunt, Burgess, Maclean and Philby, along with the espionage ring within the Manhattan Project to develop the nuclear bomb, including a guy called Klaus Fuchs. I'm going to make a couple more videos about this subject, actually. But it turns out that was just the tip of the iceberg, because the vast majority of Venona intercepts were never deciphered. These were literally, this was literally a signals being sent from the Soviet embassy in the West to the Soviet Union. Wireless signals which were in code. They were actually in carefully coded, but they were one-time random decipherment pads. That means they're basically unbreakable because they use random number sequences that were basically shared between the recipient and the transmitter and no one else. However, the Russians got a bit careless. They started reusing some of the code books, which meant that they buggered up, which meant that they could be deciphered. They could be decoded using computers and things like that. Now, like I say, the vast majority, though, were never deciphered. They were used properly, which means the agents who sent and received the transmissions were never caught. Some of them might even still be alive today and walking free. There's a chap I know, actually. I think he looks a bit... I know he's very left-wing and he looks a little bit... He used to work in... I'm not going to go down there. It's all right. Now, even the man whose very name was coined for institutional paranoid suspicion, Senator Joseph McCarthy, has been absolved somewhat. I mean, there's a very good, interesting video by Stefan Molyneux about that, about McCarthy. But I don't think any of these facts legitimise the depths and extremes of the anti-communist obsession. Because someone actually even suggested that Superman's red cape was a red flag in disguise. There's actually a number of films that emerged at the time which capture that terrified mania. And you look at them today, they're almost funny. There's one called The Red Menace, and there's a Big Jim McLean, and I find them quite amusing now. I mean, the only excuse I can think of was that this was the early Cold War. There was the threat of nuclear holocaust. It just emerged. And this is something so horrific that it caused mass insanity in the population. I mean, it's different for people like me. I was born under the shadow of the bomb, and I grew up with it. And I don't think I could possibly comprehend what it must be like for this fear suddenly to emerge after Hiroshima and the declassification of the A bomb and then the H bomb, and the fear that must have arisen when people found out in 1948 that the Russians had it as well. Do you remember the whole Roswell incident? The whole Roswell incident was explained away as an intelligence gathering exercise. They were sending up this Project Mogul balloon to try and capture the sound of the detonations, the very, very low frequency noise made by nuclear detonations in the Soviet Union. It's highly classified at the time. Now, of course, as you know, I don't believe that explains Roswell, but I've been through that. But anyway, there was the HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, was set up. Now, this was nothing to do with McCarthy because he was a senator. This was like the House of Representatives. But it did pretty much the same job. A number of cinema actors, writers and directors were subpoenaed by HUAC. Most of them refused to testify and were found in contempt of court. Now, these were known as the Hollywood 10, and they were blacklisted from America's movie industry. And these included some household names: Arthur Miller, Humphrey Bogart, Lionel Stander. And there's a good documentary about it, actually. Now, as far as Ayn Rand goes, as you know, I do have taken interest in her. I've read her books. Now, according to her biographer, Barbara Brandon, Rand agreed to assist HUAC because she was concerned about the threat from communists. But she did so under duress almost, or under protest, because she was pro-free speech and she opposed the blacklist of the Hollywood 10. And so I think she weighed it up as it was something of a moral dilemma for her, but she chose to testify. Now, a part of her testimony was interesting because she attacks It's a Wonderful Life. Her suspicions were first raised because two of its screenwriters, Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett, she didn't like because she thought they were dodgy. Now, neither of these guys were politically active, but they were acquainted with people who were communists. Although that statement could have applied to probably half the American population. But Rand really thought that this somehow thought this was communist propaganda. She claims that the principal antagonist in the film, that is Henry Potter, Lionel Barrymore's character, was an obvious caricature of a greedy banker. And Potter is indeed this off-the-shelf portrayal of a selfish and avaricious man. And of course he's a thief. He doesn't return the money. He basically steals some money by finding, lost by the uncle. And that, of course, sets up the situation where George attempts suicide. But the thing about it is, George is not a socialist figure. He's not like a red communist kind of like Labour movement kind of guy. His resistance to Potter's reign of terror is not one of organised socialism. I mean, the Bailey Building alone, this credit union, is nothing of the sort. It encourages people to become homeowners. And he creates, of course, this entire housing estate built of self-built leasehold properties for the people of Bedford Falls. This isn't the story of the left triumphing over capitalism. This is this is individual people, small-scale capitalism, triumphing over corporate feudalism. And of course, the story stresses the importance of family values, patriotism, community tradition. It's really part of the core of mid-20th century American identity. And it has a distinct spiritual theme. And it's really... I don't understand how Rand thought this was communist propaganda. Did she see the movie? Surely she did. Now, Frank Capra, he was not even a liberal. He was never accused of communism. He was not politically liberal. He co-wrote the screenplay as well as directing the film. And he says this is what he says about his film. The film that he screened every day at Christmas for the rest of his life, because he considered it his masterpiece. He said he wanted to, quote, strengthen the individual's belief in himself and combat the modern trend towards atheism, unquote. Yeah, that's Lenin talking, isn't it? So Capra agreed to collaborate with Goodrich and Hackett, and Goodrich and Hackett agreed to collaborate with him, and they did so very successfully. So that's hardly a conspiracy of Reds under the beds, is it? In fact, the film has been criticised by left-wing pundits for its religious themes and Christmas culture, and its promotion of private property and individualism. It's generally regarded as a very conservative movie. And it's important to realise this, because disliking inequity, disliking structural violence, is not exclusive to the left. I do recommend an article by Theodore Dalrymple that makes this very clear, because he does an analysis of this book. It's actually a novella, quite short story called Mumu, M-U-M-U, and it's by a Russian author called Ivan Turgenev. And it's interesting because it's about a man who, it's very sad because he kills the dog, and he's forced by the landowner to kill his dog. It's very sad, but it's interesting that in a sense, it's a film about injustice and a protestation against injustice from a somewhat right-wing perspective. I don't know. I've said a lot about Ayn Rand before, and I think this reinforces a lot of it, because I think she was capable of some very intelligent, fascinating insights. She was very brainy, high IQ and stuff, but she suffered from a warped perception in many cases, perhaps as a result of her self-imposed isolation, because her social life revolved entirely around her family and a close-knit circle of ideological supporters. She called them her collective, people like Barbara Brandon and her husband and others. She refused to appear on television and radio interviews with any of her opponents. If she encountered anyone who disagreed with her, she could dissolve into a fit of rage. She was kind of like an SJW, actually. And so she spent her whole adult life essentially living within her own safe space. I have to say, I think Ayn Rand was a very emotionally immature person. I mean, she was a brilliant in many ways. She's the same individual who was capable of producing some truly great pieces of literature. She had a skillful style, gripping plots, astonishingly thought-provoking concepts. But to denounce It's a Wonderful Life as communist propaganda, that is truly insane. I think she really lost it at this point. That being said, however, sorry Slaxer, it's has been known for It's a Wonderful Life to have a left-wing interpretation. Now, I've heard a few people say this. Usually people who've watched it, not necessarily professional critics, but some people I know who've watched it, because it is on one level about the battle of the common man against the sort of rich landlord, feudal type, lord of the manor, greedy, super rich person. Henry Potter is a very wealthy, evil man. He is, in a sense, he's a bit Machiavellian. If anything, he's a little bit one-dimensional. He's a Machiavellian character. In other words, he's just a shallow kind of evil person. I mean, as I explained, the way he's portrayed is incredible. I mean, he's even the wheelchair he's pushed around in has this kind of like gothic Dracula's castle look to it, and everything around him is black. He wears black suits. He drives a black, or he's driven by a chauffeur in a black car. Earlier on in the movie, it's a black horse and carriage, because that's earlier days, and he is almost like some kind of. You could just imagine him living in the top room of a castle, surrounded by shells full of skulls and a cauldron boiling, and his wife is a witch or something. He's a bit like, he's one-dimensional in that sense. And of course, he battles against the honest working man and woman. These are his enemies, George and his friends. And there is a left-wing interpretation of that. I understand. It's easy to see this in a left-wing way. However, I think if you do interpret it in a left-wing way, you're also seeing it in with a bit of superficiality, because there's nothing systemic about this. There's no political point made about Potter. Potter is not representative of any kind of political concept. He doesn't represent a class. So in a Soviet propaganda film, they may well have a character like Potter in any kind of left-wing socialist thing, EastEnders, for example. In fact, EastEnders does have people like that. I mean, Ian Beale in EastEnders played this role for a while. But they would have like an individual who's kind of representative of an entire class of people or a political movement, who would therefore be a straw man of that for a political agenda. Potter is not that. There's nothing about him that indicates there's any kind of social commentary. He is an individual bad guy, and there's nothing out there. There are no strings attached to that. And as I said earlier, this, as I said already, the people who oppose him, George and his friends, are not. Again, they're not part of any sort of political movement. They're not a branch of the Socialist Society or anything like that. They are simply honest, good, nice, lovable people, and they are very lovable. They're all real characters. I mean. You have there's a Martini, and he's got a strong Italian accent, and there's the people who work in the office, the guy with the little glasses, and his Uncle Billy with his pet. He's got a pet raven and a pet squirrel. Oh, they're all they're just like characters, and they're not one-dimensional. They are actually rounded characters, and there's so. In a sense, they're not really they're not representative of any kind of political tendency within the United States or anywhere else. But so I would say that there's nothing left-wing about the movie at all. It's about a fight against oppression and injustice by the forces of good. But again, in the same way of Turgenev's Moo Moo, it's told from quite a conservative perspective. I mean, the people there are not socialists. The people there are homeowners. They bought their own home. Like Martini runs the local pub, for example. And there's Bert, the policeman, who's like your friendly neighbourhood Bobby. And there's Ernie, the taxi driver. They all have homes. And they're all characters. I mean, everyone in there are very... distinctive. I mean, for example, Sam Wainwright. You always know Sam Wainwright, but maybe the filmmakers did this deliberately to give him an identity, an image, a signal, so you know who he was. Whenever the way he greets people is very unusual. He puts his hands up to the sides of his head, almost in imitation of deer antlers, and he says "hee haw." So whenever that happens, you know it's Sam Wainwright. The film essentially has a spiritual message, as I've already said, and I'll detail in more in the course of this movie. However, it is also about it's a secular human rights film. It's a film about the struggle for secular human justice, and of course, it's not a case of it's spiritual and that, because of course the quest for secular human justice, I think, is the finest expression of spirituality. And the film, I think, realises that and understands that. George's campaign, his Battle of Bedford Falls, as it's called in the film, is a spiritual one. It's a crusade. He's doing God's work, completely 100% within this world, looking after the people. It's about love, you see, love, etc. It's all about love and things like that. And for me, that is the ultimate expression of spirituality. I mean, sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop is nothing compared to what George was doing in terms of spiritual expression and bringing spirituality into this world. Interestingly enough, It's a Wonderful Life has suffered from censorship. It's suffered from censorship in more recent years, actually, as well. It's which is weird because it contains no swearing in the script. There's no explicit references to sex. It has a few scenes of mild violence, but nothing that would be too strong for any contemporary children's program, for example. So it's pretty typical, therefore, of the cinematic standards of its era, which is quite odd. So why is it that I don't understand quite why this is the case. It's been censored, but I know that there was some fuss over it because the film was apparently snubbed for the Oscars. 1946. It received an award simply for special effects because the winter scenes in the final act are they're very realistic. I mean, it looks like snow on the ground. It looks cold. This was actually filmed during a record-breaking heat wave in the summer, because everyone's dressed in winter clothes, and they have to. You can only make the film shots so long because people have to they have to get the sweat drift washed off them. They have to change out their clothes and drink a bucket of ice water or something because it's so hot. So it's during this record-breaking heat wave in California in 1946. They were filming this winter scene, and the snow is made from kind of cornflour as a kind of special artificial snow, and they won an award for that. But they didn't win an award for anything else, and many people thought they were being snubbed. And indeed, there was a bit of a fuss because the film was released into the public domain in 1974 by Republic Pictures, the people who actually produced it. But then Republic were bought out by, I think, Paramount, and a lawsuit was filed against the release, but not by the writers, not by the director, not by any actor or photographer, but by representatives of the score composers. And there was this big courtroom tussle that was picked up and run with by NBC. These were the people who eventually won the rights to show the film on television. And the film was then distributed by NBC, but only not very often. It was shown maybe once at Christmas, and apparently it was torn apart by edits, and it had lots of commercial breaks, and many fans consider this spoils the movie. So why was it subjected to this kind of censorship? It's a weird thing, and I think it's to do with the nature of the film and the message it gives out, which I'll talk about in more detail.
So Potter is trying to take over the town of Bedford Falls, and he's really nasty. He treats people really badly. He builds these horrible slum shacks for people to live in, and he charges exorbitant rent on them. If anyone misses a month's payment, they're evicted. And George Bailey, on the other hand, has this building alone, this credit union, through which he wants to make he wants to like give people the chance to own their own home in a dignified manner, to give them dignity, and prosperity, and he has like he builds this estate full of leasehold properties, and which people can afford easily with this credit union, and he makes them affordable. He doesn't make any money out of it. He makes a basic living from it. He's never rich. And whenever someone moves into a house, there's always a big party, and they they have like a ceremony where they give the person moving in a loaf of bread, so that the house may never know hunger, and salt, so that life will have flavour, and wine. So it's like a kind of present from the building alone. And Mary, his wife, really supports him, and he has 4 children, and whom he loves. But he feels unfulfilled. He doesn't really. He feels that he's wasted his life. He doesn't realise. He doesn't appreciate. I don't think he doesn't appreciate himself the way other people appreciate him. And it's a weird thing. This film, I should mention before. I'll just tell you a bit more about the end in a minute. I just want to go through my notes here. George Bailey. He's not your typical Hollywood hero. He's not an alpha male. He's flawed. He has flaws and weaknesses like we all do, and he's you and me. So he's not your average Hollywood. He's this invulnerable Hollywood alpha male, the type which were very common at the time. You know, during this era of cinema, there were people like John Wayne who didn't have that kind of depth. They didn't have that common touch that George Bailey does. John Wayne's characters I'm talking about. But he's enormously admirable. He's brave, and he's decent, and he's someone you can really he's like someone you can really admire and like, and I've got to be, films with anti-heroes are not always very good. I like a traditional film where the main protagonist is someone you can kind of get to, you can like, get involved and support and admire and look up to. Now, what happens? I'll tell you what happens. I told you there'd be spoilers in this, and haven't heard a bell ring yet. Every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. What happens is Uncle Billy, his business partner and uncle, ends up losing a large amount of money. Well, he doesn't lose it. What happens is Potter steals $8,000 from him, and this is basically the company's entire savings. And Potter then calls the police and tells the police that George has like embezzled it, and so he's in terrible trouble, and he ends up suicidal. He goes up onto a bridge over a river full of freezing ice, and he's about to jump off. But then he's visited by an angel who comes in the form of an old man called Clarence Oddbody. What a name! And in the form of this, that's what he looks like, this angel. And Clarence is trying to work out how to save him, because to lift him out of his despair. At one point, George tells him, I wish I'd never been born. It would be better off for everyone if I'd never been born. This is how despondent, how downhearted he is. He's like, it'd be better if I'd never been born. And Clarence says, right, you have your wish. You were never born. And then, he basically, when he says this, George is transported to a parallel universe, an alternate world in which he was never born. And he goes around and no one knows him. None of the people his wife, his mother, the rest of his family, his friends, none of them know him. They think he's just a stranger to them. And the town of Bedford Falls has turned into a living hell. It's a den of iniquity and poverty and crime. Everyone's miserable. Everyone's stressful. People are dying. People are sick. And it's not called Bedford Falls anymore. It's called Pottersville. It's named after the greedy businessman who wanted to take it over. And there's the main street. There used to be shops and things like that there. Now there's brothels and strip clubs and burlesque houses and things like that. It's just a nasty, seedy place. And so George runs around in a panic, wondering what the hell he's going to do. And as Clarence says, I mean, and he goes up to because he saves his brother's life. You see, his brother Harry, his brother Henry, he saves his life in an accident. So his brother Henry, when they were little kids, they're playing on an iced over lake, and Harry falls in, and George dives in and saves him. Now, when Harry grows up, he joins during the World War II, he joins the U.S. Navy air arm, and he saved an entire troop ship from being hit by a kamikaze pilot. But in this alternative world, Harry's dead. He died aged 9 years old in this accident because George wasn't there to save him. I've gone dark again. And so, of course, when he died, it means every man on the troop ship died as well, because Henry wasn't there to save them, you know. So, as Clarence then says, you know, each man touches another, so in so many ways that when he's not there, it leaves an awfully big hole, doesn't it? And in the end, George realises that he has had a wonderful life. He realises, he understands how valuable he is. What a wonderful guy he is. And he then begs Clarence to return him to the real world where he was born, and he does. And George goes home, and guess what? All this family and friends have got together, they've chipped in, and they've got all the money they can to bail him out. And Sam Wainwright gives him like a whole load of money, and he becomes the richest man in town. And rich in financially, but also because he has friends and people who love him. People love him like they love him like all the love he's given is given back to him. And it's a positive, very, very positive message. Like I said, it plunges right into the depths of humanity and spirituality. In many ways, this film, you've got to see it to understand. The acting's really, really great. I mean, James Stewart was a great actor. I mean, the facial expressions he makes when he's scared and things like that, really, really great. Lionel Barrymore as Henry Potter's very good. He drives around in this. He's like he's got a wheelchair. I think he's stuck in a wheelchair, but his wheelchair looks like something. His wheelchair itself looks like something from a horror movie. It's gothic kind of thing, and he drives around in this big black horse and carriage, or this later on it's a motor vehicle. It looks like a hearse. You know, he's almost like a walking corpse, and he's soulless. You know, he's like a soulless man. He's just greedy. He's cruel, and he's just a mean, very mean, unpleasant guy. He hates everyone. He does his best to make everyone as poor as possible, so he can be as rich as possible. Although, I mean, this I think is where the Ayn Rand thing came in. But the thing about it is, though, as I explained, you could interpret it from a left-wing perspective as being like anti-capitalist. It's certainly anti-greed. It's anti-greed and selfishness. It's not anti-capitalist, though. As I explained, it's actually quite a conservative movie. It's got a spiritual theme, very, very powerful spiritual theme. It's about prayer. You know, everyone begins with everyone praying for George because they know he's in trouble, and it ends with them helping him out. And the angel, of course. There's a scene where you hear God's voice as well, just amazing. So it promotes family, traditional, mid 20th century American values of family, the church, God. The national pride, community spirits and things like that. So I wouldn't call it a left-wing film at all. As I said, I think Ayn Rand completely misjudged it. And indeed so did the committee, the House Un-American Activities Committee. It's funny, there's a little anecdote connected to this, which I heard on a video the other day. When I looked up a video about... where am I now? Sorry, just look at my notes. Yeah, to do with Telly Savalas. Telly Savalas was a actor who played Kojak. He's well known for playing Kojak. Bald guy. Bald guys are cool, I think. And when it was first released in 1946, Savalas was just like a young guy, and he was a bit of a wide boy, and he sneaked into the cinema without paying. He slipped in through the fire exit or something, and when he watched the film, he came out. He got away with getting in for nothing. He could have just walked out with the crowds, and no one would ever know that he got in for without paying. But he went, when the film was over, he went up to the box office and he confessed what he'd done, and he gave them the money it would have cost him to have his ticket. And as this video says, It's a Wonderful Life brings that kind of spirit out in people. It brings the best out in people. It brings out their integrity and their honesty. It's a film about love. Primarily love of your family, love of your wife, husband, children, your fellow man, your friends. It's about a community where everyone knows each other and they care for each other. Which is what is taken away when George is not there, because he helped hold that community together, and he didn't realise it. Yeah, it's a celebration of eccentricity too, because George, like I said, he's not your standard Hollywood alpha male, generic hero. He's no John Wayne, like I said. He's a mixed character, and he's eccentric. He's unusual. I mean, you see, because to begin with, there are two. The woman he marries, Mary, is his childhood sweetheart. Well, she falls in love with him when she's a young child, and it's all very sweet. It's very sweet indeed. And, she's these little kids, and she falls in love with him, and eventually he falls in love with her. But when they're older, when they're adults. But there's another girl who was vying for his affection called Violet. And at one point George gets very depressed, and he's before he marries Mary, or is in a relationship with Mary, and he goes up to Violet and he says, and she's all over him, hey, what we want to do tonight, baby? And he says, let's go out. He says, let's go out into the countryside, into the woods, climb a mountain, take our shoes off and walk through the long grass and watch the sunrise and things like that. And Violet goes, what, are you crazy? Get away from me. So she's very conventional. She goes off him after that. So he's like a bit like me. He's kind of an eccentric who some other people find his eccentricities a little bit hard to deal with. But it's amazing like that. I think it's still, as you can see, it's still a much loved film. As I said before, in terms of home entertainment media, so I'm just going to cross over this road now. In terms of home entertainment media, it's still one of the most popular of the so-called Christmas movies, and it's a much loved film. It's like, I think there were many people were saying how that they did a survey, and I think this came in the top 10 of films that people most loved, and it deserves to be there. And so, why has it had all this trouble being censored and things like that? I mean, the censorship, as I said, from NBC seems to have increased, and I think it's because it's such a positive film, because it has such a wonderful effect on people, because it is so uplifting and invigorating and inspiring, and makes people feel better about themselves in a way that no other feel-good movie does, at a very deep spiritual level. Like I said, I think for that reason, I think the Illuminati, powers that be, whatever you want to call them, don't want people seeing it. They don't want too many people watching it. They don't want us to have that kind of inspiration and invigorate, that refreshment of the spirit that the film brings. It's a film designed to build you up, not knock you down. So much art today, or what passes for it, is about destruction. It's about destruction. It's about exploring the horrific, the degenerate, the frightening, and they're depressing. A lot of art is about that today, including, I'm talking about books, cinematic art, visual arts, music, everything. This film does the opposite. This film is about creating. It's a Wonderful Life is a gift. It's intended as a gift to people. It's an act of love. Making this film was an act of love by Frank Capra and all the other people who produced and wrote it and directed it and starred in it, to give people something good to enrich their lives. The Illuminati don't want that. They don't want us being enriched, inspired. They want us downbeaten. They want to break us down, psychologically, culturally, mentally, into little pieces, so they can rebuild us in their image, and the few of us that are allowed to leave alive as slaves for the New World Order. That's why I think they don't want people seeing It's a Wonderful Life. And they failed. I mean, not only is it now free, it's freely available everywhere. I mean, you can get it for a small price. You want to watch it on Amazon or something, it's a small price. I've got a copy of the DVD for a few quid. And in the cinema with me, it's a small cinema. It's a nice sort of small, quaint little place, like I said earlier. I think the seats were pretty full. I mean, I think there was probably about 40 people in there. 40 people coming out on a wet night in 2019 to watch a 73-year-old movie. Which is, you can get anywhere. Indeed, I have the DVD, and I still went out to watch it. That says something. That does. That says that the dedication of the filmmakers was not in vain. They succeeded in creating a masterpiece of inspiration and love, and those who tried to stop it have failed. All these years later, from when it was released, it still affects people, it still moves people, and it still does good things for them and builds their and improves their lives, so that we can be free people, we can be free human beings, and not the slaves to the New World Order that the Illuminati want us to be. And It's a Wonderful Life is helping people become that. It's helping people become free. And that, I think, is the biggest message of the film, and that's one of the reasons that I love it. So, I'm glad I went. It cost a tenner to get in. It's not cheap. It's not a cheap cinema, but I'm glad. It was worth it. And so I hope you enjoy this little review. And don't forget, please go and watch the movie. It's perfect at Christmas. It's a perfect thing to watch at Christmas. It is classified as a Christmas movie. But to be honest, you could enjoy it any time of the year. Thank you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order.